Vince McMahon declined to participate in the documentary you are about to watch.
Earlier tonight, my father, Vince McMahon, retired from WWE.
With those 9 words, Stephanie McMahon stunned the world of professional wrestling.
I don't think anybody would have ever said that Vince McMahon would have ever stepped down.
Everybody figured that he was going to do this until he died.
Welcome to SmackDown!
Over decades, Vince McMahon faced financial ruin.
Vince mortgaged every dime that he had.
Battled ruthless competition.
And now WCW is about to dominate the globe in professional wrestling.
And confronted career-ending scandals.
Speculation is running wild. Did steroids play a role, or is there another explanation?
He can be a tyrant.
The whole thing was an abortive kind of a screw job.
So many scandals.
I don't even know if there would be a wrestling business by the time all the investigations were complete.
Often close to being pinned.
He was down many times.
Vince always kicks out.
In every case, he bounced back.
I've never seen anything like that.
These are the 9 lives of Vince McMahon.
First of all, I resent your tone.
The origin story of the rich and powerful wrestling mogul, Vincent McMahon Jr., begins in a poor, run-down North Carolina trailer park where a tough, mouthy, dyslexic kid named Vinnie Lupton is living with his mom.
There was some kind of a falling out in the marriage, and then he and his brother Rod were left to be raised by their mother Vicky. He kind of had a chip on his shoulder from the beginning.
All most people know from this period of Vince's life comes from his 2001 interview with Playboy magazine.
He alludes to his mother sexually assaulting him. He alludes to being molested when he was 6 by other teenage kids.
There's stories of his mother bringing various different men into their lives. There was in particular Leo Lupton, who was officially Vince's stepfather. He apparently was a very abusive man.
And despite that abuse, or perhaps because of it, Vince develops a ruthlessness that will come to define him.
Vince said that he was upset that Leo Lupton died before he had a chance to kill him, and that he would have really enjoyed being able to do that.
At 12, Vince finally meets his biological father, who happens to be one of wrestling's most successful promoters, Vincent James McMahon, or Vince Sr.
Vincent James McMahon was the most important person in professional wrestling in the northeastern United States.
Here's promoter Vince McMahon's wrestling lineup for this arena next week.
Vince becomes like that storybook teenager who runs away from an evil stepfather to join the circus.
You know, there's stories of Vince hanging out with Dr. Jerry Graham, who is this very flamboyant, kind of over-the-top figure in pro wrestling. Vince would ride down the street in his convertible with him while he was lighting cigars, you know, with $100 bills.
But when Vince starts stealing cars for joyrides and getting into fights, Vince Sr. tries sending him away.
Vince went to Fishburne Military Academy. Legend has it that he got into a lot of trouble.
He claimed that he was the only student there to ever have been court-martialed. I don't know how much truth there is to that, but the story goes that he was an unruly kid and that the military school kind of really had their hands full with him.
Until his mom finds him a girl, as Vince explains in this 1999 TV interview.
My mom had said, you know, you have to come meet this beautiful blue-eyed girl. You know, she sings in the choir and she's pretty and you're really going to like her.
Let's see, I think I was 13 years old and Vince was
16.
Dare I say that you were older? Yes, he was 16.
Vince and Linda married on August 26, 1966. After college, Vince goes looking for a job at his dad's Capital Wrestling Corporation. But Vince says his father again turns him away.
He wanted me to have a more secure future. He wanted me to be an accountant or an attorney or something like that. And I really wasn't cut out for any of the above.
He's right. Out on his own, Vince stumbles badly.
He had talked about being a salesman, selling paper cups, things that didn't really thrill him and not doing very well at it.
Then, for the first of many times, Vince escapes adversity, this time aided by his dad.
They had an announcer named Ray Morgan who was kind of becoming difficult. Vince Sr. hired his son officially as an announcer and also gave him some small towns to promote.
This Monday, a fantastic card of professional wrestling.
Vince, a natural-born huckster, is soon putting those skills to work on all kinds of side hustles.
He was promoting concerts, rock concerts,
and a closed-circuit screening of the infamous bout between Muhammad Ali and Japanese wrestler Antonio Inoki.
Just like I start off fighters, right, fans?
In 1974, Vince even gets a chance to work with Evel Knievel, learning tricks from that decade's biggest self-promoter.
Vince was one of the promoters of the Evel Knievel Snake River Canyon Jump.
Vince pays the Daredevil $250,000 for the closed-circuit rights to the jump. Knievel's attempt fails spectacularly, and so does Vince. The audience willing to pay for the event turns out to be paltry, and Vince loses the entire $250,000. Just a few years later, he and his wife Linda file for bankruptcy. Yet despite his failed ventures away from wrestling, Vince is still convinced that he can expand his father's business.
He really wanted to bring his dad's wrestling company to the next level.
But not as an employee, as the new owner of the company.
I knew there was just some way I had to get my hands on this company.
June 6, 1982. It's sort of a red-letter date in wrestling history. Vince sat down with his father and his father's partners.
The deal was for $1 million.
Vince mortgaged everything he had, every dime that he had.
And he bought it on a balloon loan. He describes it as you pay a little right now and then you pay a lot later.
And if he missed payments, then the ownership would revert back to the original group.
They knew Vince knew the business, and if he failed, he failed. You know, they would get their money anyway.
The message was, if you can't handle this, if it turns out you blow it, we're taking it back.
But there may have been an even bigger reason why Vince Sr. was finally willing to pass the reins.
He had pancreatic cancer, and this may have been one of the motivations for him to sell.
Vince Sr. had spent decades as one of the most revered owners in professional wrestling.
The stories that you hear about Vince Sr. don't revolve around ruthlessness or overly competitiveness. Once he had control in the Northeast, he was satisfied to kind of run that territory and do really well with it.
As for Vince Jr., he will not be so easily satisfied.
My dad wouldn't have really sold me the business had he known what I was going to do.
He had a vision to take his father's territory in New York and literally make it the biggest wrestling company, not only in the United States, in the world, to make it global.
Vince Jr. was more willing to take it all and be ruthless.
But first, Vince has to take on his father's old friends, the mostly men running the other wrestling companies across the country.
Every state had a wrestling territory. New York was the WWF. Oh, there was Memphis, there was Georgia, there was Florida, there was Texas.
There was the sense that everybody would respect each other's territory.
And for the most part, promotions all over the US and Canada coexisted, and it was a really thriving industry.
And he thought, why do I have to respect these boundaries? Why can't I just start promoting everywhere?
Because doing so threatens the businesses of Vince Sr.'s fellow wrestling promoters.
You had these promoters now going to Vince Sr., they were his old friends, and saying, you have to talk to your son. He's out of control. Are you aware that he's trying to, run us out of our town? So Vince Sr. approached his son at some point saying, Vinny, you can't do this. And eventually Vince Jr. lost his temper at his dad and said, look, I'm going to do this with or without you, Dad. I mean, you work for me now. Are you with me or are you against me? Vince Sr. kind of took a moment and thought about it and was quiet and then looked at his son and said, you know what, Vinny, you're right. F those guys.
And he did, by taking from them the thing they needed most.
The talent, they all went for Vince. Your talent's gone, you can't eat. And that was it.
Now, either you get out of the way or you compete against an elephant.
Vince injects some competition into the industry, paying wrestlers more than they can dream of under the cozy old system. Then he buys time from local TV stations to promote his shows to sell more tickets. That helps generate the cash he needs to begin buying up struggling territories. As his vision of a national wrestling company comes into focus, the master marketer goes looking for someone to inject show business into the wrestling business.
This man is not a television illusion. He is not an artist's conception. He is not a figment of the imagination. He is the Hulk.
Making his first appearance in this arena, ladies and gentlemen, Hulk Hogan.
Vince is looking for the superhero. He's going national, but it's not going to work unless he has this larger-than-life person.
Hogan was the guy to choose. He had the great look.
I mean, to this day, if you ask somebody on the street to name a professional wrestler, they're probably still going to name Hulk Hogan.
Vince made Hogan just a perfect offer that he couldn't turn down.
Vince told him, we're going to put the belt on you. You're going to be our #1 guy.
He came in at the beginning of January 1984, and by the end of the month, he was the WWF World Heavyweight Champion.
History being made tonight. Hulk Hogan, crowned the new WWF Heavyweight Champion.
And really the linchpin to that national expansion. It was Vince and it was Hogan. Neither one of those guys could have done it without the other one.
While Vince is modernizing the wrestling industry, some things in wrestling remain the same. Most territories still practice what's called kayfabe, maintaining the illusion everything's real.
What a move! Karate kick right to the side of the head.
But what's not an illusion is the very real threat to Vince's emerging empire. When News Magazine 2020's John Stossel begins investigating kayfabe and whether it's a fraud on wrestling fans.
I was a wrestler in high school, and I was always a little annoyed that some people believed that pro wrestling was real, rather than a scripted event where the winner is preordained and people dress up in funny clothes and pretend anger and bullshit.
It had leaked out that 2020 was going to do a piece, and obviously if it's ABC Network News, it's going to be an expose. I
just thought it was interesting that this big, growing, successful business was based on bullshit. I mean, cleverly done, athletic bullshit, but lies.
Stossel's story could lead to a significant exodus of disillusioned fans, just as Vince has all his capital committed to building the WWF into a national brand.
We either did a survey or found a survey that about a third of the people who attended the events thought it was real.
This is real.
Yeah, I think so, yes.
We couldn't do a story unless we could find some insider who would say, yeah, here's how we fake this and that, and was willing to go into a ring and demonstrate. And eventually we found Eddie Mansfield.
Mansfield is a wrestler with a cause, publicizing the vulnerability of WWF wrestlers who have no health benefits or pensions. He hopes a story on 2020 will raise awareness to the plight of fellow pro wrestlers, so he agrees to spill some secrets.
Is this real wrestling?
No, not real, no, not at all. I mean, if somebody believed that, they'd be stupid.
Nobody wanted fake blood, so everybody bled for real. There's two ways to do that, the easy way and the hard way. The easy way is with a blade.
You go just like that.
And then gradually during the match, it would drip down over your face.
That's it. See, if I was sweating, it'd pour.
I thought, well, we need to have the usual person from the professional organization saying, oh, this isn't fake, this is all real. And so we went to Madison Square Garden. I guess Vince McMahon okayed it, or we wouldn't have been there.
Vince wants to send Stossel a message, so he tells wrestler David Schultz to maintain kayfabe and treat Stossel like any other opponent.
Vince said, listen, we got a guy out here making a joke out of the business.
Vince wanted me to tear his ass up, wanted me to blast him, stay in character.
Vince denies telling Schultz to assault Stossel and disowns any involvement in what happened next.
And then Schultz came out. he was a little frightening.
Is this a good business?
Yeah, it's a good business. I wouldn't be in it if it wasn't.
Why is it a good business?
Because only the tough survive. That's the reason you ain't in it. And this punk holding the camera reading he ain't in it. Reading these rednecks out here ain't in it because it's a tough business.
I think this is fake.
I think it's fake. Now I'm thinking Vince wanted me to stay in character. Dr. D slapped the hell out of somebody say that.
You think it's fake? What's that? Is that fake?
Holy shit. What the hell just happened here? And then I stupidly got up again.
Huh? What the hell's wrong with you? That's open hand slap, huh?
I was always taught, man, get up. You got to knock him back down.
You think it's fake? You come like this?
He whacked me in the other ear. My ears were ringing.
What do you mean? Fake?
I was stunned and a little scared, and that's why I crawled off. I didn't want to get hit again.
2 months later, Stossel's report airs. Now it's his turn to slap the wrestling community.
You little pissant, John Stossel. That's what all the wrestlers thought about him.
Then Stossel delivers a second blow, hitting Vince where it can really do some damage.
I thought that McMahon and his group should be taught a lesson that they can't go beating up reporters. And I sued for damages.
After what became known as the slap heard round the world, Vince fires Schultz to save the WWE from a PR black eye. But it's not enough. In response, Vince delivers what will become his closer, throwing money at the problem. Stossel is bought off for a reported $420,000.
I wanted some compensation for my pain.
And while Vince also suffers some pain over the allegations his wrestlers are faking it in the ring, that proves fleeting compared to the misery he's suffering over their behavior out in the real world, beginning with WWF star Jimmy Superfly Snuka.
Jimmy Snuka was Vince's #1 drawing card at the time.
In 1983, Snuka is dating 23-year-old Nancy Argentino.
She ended up dead, and in a hotel room they were sharing in Allentown, Pennsylvania.
Vince calls wrestler Don Morocco to find out what happened.
Vince says, "Have you heard anything about Snuka and his girlfriend?" I said, "As a matter of fact, here I am with Lieutenant so-and-so." And I put him on the phone to Vince.
Snuka claims that Nancy fell. Then she went back to their hotel room and went to sleep. But the autopsy report raises doubts about Snuka's explanation.
It says, the pattern of her injuries is not consistent with a single simple fall. The magnitude of the injuries may even be suggestive of maid abuse. I believe that the case should be investigated as a homicide until proven otherwise.
Vince McMahon would have great reason to defend Jimmy Snuka. Let's say at the time he is charged with murder in 1983. That would be a terrible thing for the WWF.
If one of your top employees is being investigated for murder, that's bad for business.
So Vince rushes to Allentown. After he meets with police, Snuka is released without charges.
Jimmy said to me, Vince came down with his briefcase and said to him, "It's over, don't worry about it, it's done."
Unlike all of the other interviews that were done in this case, there is no detailed transcript of what was said over an hour. But after that meeting, the case effectively went cold.
Vince insists that the meeting was entirely above board, and that local officials told him that the circumstances of Nancy's death were consistent with an accidental fall. But 3 decades later, in 2015, Jimmy Snuka is arrested and charged with Nancy Argentino's murder.
He was a legend in the wrestling ring tonight. He's accused of murder.
The rules and the regulations and the morals that exist in the real world don't exist in the wrestling bubble. They've got their own way of doing things.
The Jimmy Snuka story is a foreshadow of the string of controversies that will confront Vince, many of his own making.
Because nobody's gonna say no to him. Nobody's gonna say no.
After buying out his father's wrestling business for $1 million, Vince McMahon's driving ambition is to transform the once regional Worldwide Wrestling Federation into the national wrestling brand. To do it, He needs a way to reach audiences across the country. One solution is to air matches on the TV station, TBS.
From Turner Broadcasting System, you're watching Superstation WTBS, Atlanta.
Superstation, because it has coast-to-coast distribution. It's owned by media giant and longtime wrestling fan, Ted Turner.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to World Championship Wrestling.
But TBS is already home to World Championship Wrestling, which airs Saturday nights. WCW is owned by Vince Sr.'s longtime friend, promoter Jim Barnett.
Here's the man that absolutely had the strength of 10 men.
But in 1984, Vince Jr. muscles the lucrative TBS time slot away from Barnett's WCW, introducing the WWF to a brand new audience.
Here's Vince McMahon. Vince?
Thank you very much, Freddie.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you. It is indeed a pleasure to be associated with WTBS, and we promise to bring you the greatest in professional wrestling entertainment in the world today.
To the rope now, coming up. Double elbow butt.
The audiences rejected it. They were used to the more southern brand of wrestling that they came to love, which Vince didn't bank on. And it was what became known as Black Saturday.
Black Saturday for the WWF because week after week, fans just don't tune in.
Ted Turner's losing patience, and he starts entertaining offers from other promoters.
Under pressure, Vince throws in the towel and sells out to his biggest competitor, Jim Crockett's Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling.
The figure was $1 million that they paid for it. And Vince, supposedly, who was, very bitter about this, it was a defeat because being national on TBS was a very big deal.
It's also a wake-up call. Vince needs to modernize the WWF.
He decided to take the money that he was paid and turn it against the people that had paid it to him and use it to fund his ambitions even further.
Being one of the strongest. There we go.
And that's to build not just a national wrestling company, but a multifaceted sports entertainment empire. It's the early 1980s, and cable TV is introducing audiences to specialty networks like ESPN, CNN, and what will be most important to Vince McMahon's immediate future, MTV. Vince sees an opportunity to retune the WWF by getting in bed with rock stars.
One advantage that he had was that a lot of celebrities had grown up in the New York area as fans of wrestling, and one of those was Cyndi Lauper.
Cyndi Lauper was on an airplane flight with Lou Albano, and then Lou Albano tells everyone that he was managing Cyndi Lauper.
Wrestling events were being shown on the MTV network. They were getting specials on MTV.
It brought the dated look of wrestling into the mainstream. Woo, I'm happy.
Vince decides to spotlight his redesign of the WWF with an expensive, celebrity-filled extravaganza he calls WrestleMania.
Vince's concept for WrestleMania was the biggest wrestling event ever held times 10, an over-the-top, closed-circuit, globally broadcast extravaganza that would combine celebrities and wrestling matches.
He made it into this sort of entertainment variety show. A little bit more willing to be ridiculous, a little bit more willing to push the envelope, allowing people to be in on the joke.
The vision was Barnum and Bailey. The vision was Walt Disney. That was the vision, that this company could compete on that level.
And then they linked up with Mr. T. Mr. T was on the A-Team. Absolutely super popular television show.
People don't realize today how big a star Mr. T was in the mid-'80s.
You want him? No, you take him.
He had a great body and a mohawk, and he wore the chains, but he looked the part and he talked the part.
You've been teaching me how to pump iron, get my pythons ready, and I'm glad you brought me here.
And he hooked up with Hulk Hogan for the first WrestleMania. Hogan hitching his wagon to Mr. T catapulted Hulk into the mainstream.
As the scale of WrestleMania grows, so do the costs. Like his youthful failed promotion of Evel Knievel's Snake River Jump, Vince pumps in a lot of his own cash.
Vince could create a spectacle, and spectacles cost money.
WrestleMania was a huge gamble. They were spreading themselves very thin.
Vince's entire mentality was, I'm banking on myself.
WrestleMania is scheduled to air on March 31st, 1985.
As it was getting closer to WrestleMania, it was very far from a sure thing.
They booked about 200 buildings, and then a week out, the advances were so bad they canceled like 65, 67 of them.
It was looked at as almost like Vince's folly. You know, within the business, there was this thought of like, oh my God, this is going to completely blow up in his face.
The story is, if WrestleMania fails, that's it. He's done.
But at 11:30, on the night before the event,
one of the things at the 11th hour that really helped was Saturday Night Live. Hulk Hogan and Mr. T, they were a last-minute replacement.
Not another lawsuit, T. Oh, no, T. Oh, my God. Oh,
It wound up leading to a lot more interest in WrestleMania the next day, a lot more interest from the closed-circuit exhibitors.
But will it be enough?
The whole world knows about this, man. Hulk Hogan and Mr. T start to track the dream team, man. The dream team.
WrestleMania is a nowhere-to-hide life-or-death test of Vince's strategy to link non-wrestling celebrities to the WWF's biggest star.
If there was no Hulk Hogan, the first WrestleMania, I will tell you 100% would have flopped, and Vince would have gone down with it.
Welcome, everyone. The World Wrestling Federation presents the wrestling extravaganza of all time, WrestleMania. Standing in there, suplex.
The first WrestleMania was huge.
Drop kick by Santana, and out goes the executioner.
It set sales records for wrestling pay-per-views and closed circuit. By gambling the WWF's financial health, Vince McMahon wins the national recognition he's been chasing. Even network television is now willing to pay him to air the WWF, starting with Saturday night's main event on NBC. But even as he escapes the financial hazards surrounding WrestleMania, Vince finds himself ensnared in another scandal, one that could not just bring down the WWF, it could land Vince in jail.
If I wanted a $500,000 a year contract, I had to satisfy him. He just didn't stop. This man just didn't stop.
The success of WrestleMania in the mid-'80s vindicates Vince McMahon's strategy to transform WWF wrestlers into kid-friendly, larger-than-life superheroes.
It is my distinct privilege to present to you
But not everybody in the WWF family is celebrating.
Rita Chatterton, she was a referee. She was promoted as the first female WWF referee. According to her, she eventually wasn't getting booked as much as she wanted to get booked, and she tried to have a conversation with Vince about it. On a certain night, he got her in the limo, and according to Rita Chatterton, he coerced her into sex, essentially raped her.
So it's basically sex, and now you're gone.
Rita Chatterton told Andre the Giant, I believe, the next day. She told another wrestler named Mario Mancini the next day.
You know, the day after it happened, I walked into an arena, and Rita was in the arena leaning against the ring apron. And I walked up to her with a smile, ready to give her that brotherly hug, you know, and she just burst out in tears. And I said, well, what happened?
A few years later, Rita tells her story on a TV talk show.
Next thing I know, Vince McMahon is unzipping his pants. I was forced into oral sex with Vince McMahon. When I couldn't complete his desires, he got really angry, started ripping off my jeans, pulled me on top of him, and told me again, if I wanted a $500,000 a year contract, I had to satisfy him.
I think if those allegations had come to light in more modern times, you know, after Me Too, that those would have been a much bigger deal.
To avoid upsetting her parents, Chatterton waits until they're dead before going public. But by then, the statute of limitations has run out. McMahon not only denies her allegations, he sues Chatterton for defamation before quietly letting the suit drop because he needs his lawyers to defend him against the next looming scandal.
She did referee a little bit more through the New York State Athletic Commission, but as far as WWF goes, Her career was pretty much over at that point.
As for Vince, his career is still just getting started. The WWF's audience begins growing as its wrestlers get bigger.
At that time, the fans were responding to cool-looking guys with these great physiques.
They were just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it was becoming more of a vehicle to sell merchandise than anything else.
Ultimania will live forever.
And wrestlers were expected to look the part, no matter what it took.
People do not understand the pressure that you're under. Look the best you can to keep your spot in the business. It was high pressure.
It wasn't that Vince was directly saying, we want you to get on steroids. People that worked for him might approach a guy and say, we'd like you to put on maybe 10, 20 pounds in the next, few weeks. And they weren't telling you how to do it.
There are estimates that 90% of the wrestlers in that time period were all on steroids.
Everybody was on steroids. That's what they were marketing.
If I look this way, I'm going to get a better push. I'm going to get a better spot on the card. I'm going to make more money. And Vince himself was taking them to get huge.
We did whatever it took to give what the people wanted to see.
That's the why of steroids. The how is a ringside doctor.
Dr. George Saharian was the ringside physician for the Pennsylvania State Athletic Commission. And he was assigned to ringside at all of the wrestling matches in Allentown, Pennsylvania for their TV tapings.
And the doctor is right there at his side.
He always had this big doctor bag. And he would open it up afterwards, and he would say, is there anything you would like?
Valium, Tylenol 3, Percocet, Percodan, Somas, pain pills, steroids.
He set up shop every taping, and the guys lined up to purchase their candy.
And if it isn't there, I can get it for you, and I can send it to you.
But starting in 1991, delivering steroids without a prescription becomes illegal.
This means that trafficking in steroids will be treated in much the same manner as trafficking in cocaine or methamphetamines.
Soon after the ban, a steroid investigation into weightlifting coach Bill Dunn leads the FBI to the WWF's Dr. George Zahorian.
Dunn had been, I gather, caught with a large amount of steroids. Flipped, became a government witness, agreed to wear a wire.
I want to get a large order, but I need some. Can you tell me what you need? Because, it's like I told you, cash and carry. If I have it, you got it, you pay.
They used that tape of Zahorian to then get a search warrant. On the wall of his office, they still have that famous picture of him standing there with Hulk on one side and Vince on the other side, and thought, oh, what do we have here?
On June 28, 1991, Dr. Zahorian is convicted of 8 counts of distributing steroids and 4 counts of illegally distributing prescription painkillers.
And Vince McMahon was aware of it. Everybody was. If it was an overt agreement, I can get you steroids, that's Vince McMahon being a drug dealer to his top star.
But Dr. Zahorian is just the undercard in the government's battle against the illegal use of steroids in pro wrestling. The main event is the prosecution of Vince McMahon.
They wanted to have a big high-profile trial at that time to sort of get it out there that the law is different now with respect to steroids.
Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Federation have been indicted on charges of providing steroids to WWF entertainers.
The indictment says that McMahon and a doctor conspired to distribute steroids to the wrestlers to enhance their size and muscle development.
Vince McMahon denies he facilitated any illegal drug activity, but with the trial looming, he decides to retool the WWF once again, this time to help protect himself.
Because of the steroid scandal, Vince McMahon couldn't keep Hogan around. Vince McMahon had to shift his focus to smaller wrestlers who were more athletic.
In 1993, the one-time WWF savior is gone.
You can have everything you want out of life, and I'm not ashamed of anything I've done.
As Hogan begins performing in Ted Turner's WCW, Vince puts on his own show as an anti-steroid crusader.
I promise that the World Wrestling Federation will be the standard bearer for drug-free sports and entertainment.
But in July 1994, the steroid trial of Vince McMahon begins.
There were wrestling fans there. There were newsletter writers there. Vince's family that would show up every day in the courtroom. Vince shows up wearing this neck brace, and, everyone is kind of laughing at it.
People are like, you've got to be kidding me. You're actually playing on the jury for sympathy and a neck brace?
Here we go. It's a wrestling angle.
The prosecution's star witness is none other than Hulk Hogan.
And there were expectations that Hogan was going to go in there and kind of bury Vince.
Hulk Hogan testifying could seal the deal for the prosecution and send Vince to prison for years. He is the person the prosecution said bought drugs from Vince McMahon.
Hulk Hogan is finally here. What is he going to say?
After convicting a ringside doctor who worked WWF matches of illegally distributing steroids, the government turns its attention to the man running the WWF, Vince McMahon.
If convicted, McMahon faces 8 years in prison and $500,000 in fines.
And there's one wrestler the government hopes will help secure that conviction. But Hogan has other ideas.
And on 3 different occasions, I had the same type muscle injuries. That is the extent of Hulk Hogan's steroid use.
And it's like, I took steroids 3 times back in 1983. I tore my bicep, I used it for rehab. And then it was just like, oh my God. It was just a complete, utter lie.
Hogan framed it to the shock of the prosecutors and to people gasping in the courtroom quietly. We were gym buddies. We were friends. Sometimes I had extra steroids, I gave them to Vince. Sometimes Vince had extra steroids, he gave them to me. That doesn't make him a drug dealer.
There goes their case.
He kind of just like exonerated Vince for any implication of his involvement at all.
But not everyone viewed Hogan as Vince's savior.
Vince didn't see it that way. Vince was furious Hogan testified against him.
Yeah, I think they didn't want any part of each other towards the end. It was kind of like, you go your way, I go my way, and nice knowing you, pal.
But Hogan's testimony is only the first blow to the prosecution's case. Other witnesses took the stand and downplayed Vince's role.
You know, maybe I'm an optimist, but I didn't spend 1 minute of my time thinking about losing. They took the verdict first against Vince. They said not guilty.
And when it was not guilty, it was almost like, you know, Hulk Hogan had just won a match at Madison Square Garden. It was like people just popped.
This one is my favorite one up here. The jury announces verdict. That's Linda, me, and Vince hugging. And what I always thought was interesting is the hands clapping, because that is what happened. The jury verdict was very popular.
You got a lot of money, you can get out of a lot of things, which really is the story of his downfall. Got a great attorney, and he bought his way out of trouble. No consequences. What do you learn? You learn that you're bulletproof.
As we say in the World Wrestling Federation, and it could very well be that the hunters are soon will be the hunted.
What does that mean, Vince?
Stay tuned, Rosanna.
Rosanna won't have to wait long. Soon after surviving the steroid trial, Vince begins scanning his roster for his next big superstar, turning his gaze north to Canada and the Hart family.
The Hart family is one of the most famous families in the history of our business. The sons were all wrestlers, the daughters all married wrestlers.
And Stu began the Stampede Wrestling promotion in Alberta and had a very successful company there for a long time.
Back when Vince first came sniffing around his territory, Stu's business was on the ropes, so he agreed to Vince buying him out.
When he bought out our promotion, I believe it was supposed to be for $1 million fee.
My dad didn't get paid, and the whole thing was an abortive screw job.
He knew my dad wasn't going to contest the legality of their agreement. He got all of our rings, a lot of our top talent.
McMahon, for his part, claims to have paid the Harts in full.
He took Bret Hart and Jim Neidhart, who was the son-in-law, as a team, the Hart Foundation.
Internationally, we're getting reports back that we've got a megastar on our hands in the form of Bret Hart.
So, Vince bestows on Bret the WWF Championship.
When you were chosen to be a champion of a major company, it meant that the promoter thought that you were the best talent, that you were the best draw, that you would make him the most money, that you were the guy.
But at the same time, remember that someone made you champion.
Bret is soon approached by WCW's Eric Bischoff, who waves a multi-million-dollar offer in front of him. Vince feels he can't afford to lose Bret to his #1 competitor, so the WWF Don makes Bret an offer he thinks he can't refuse.
Vince heard about them giving me an offer, and I remember Vince said, he goes, I'll make you an offer, and we worked out a contract. It was $1.5 million for 20 years, I think.
But before Bret can sign his new contract with the WWF, Vince has second thoughts, not about Bret's talents, but about his own finances. WCW has peeled off TV viewers, and Vince is short on cash.
Vince comes back and looks at the commitment that he had made to Bret Hart. It was a drain on the company for what we were bringing in at the time.
Bret learns a valuable lesson about doing business with Vince McMahon. When there's a question about who should suffer financially, you or Vince, it's usually you.
Vince told me that basically he couldn't afford to pay me the contract that he'd given me. Kind of broke my heart, like where it's like, okay, I get it. I remember I got off the phone from him and I said, I guess I'm done. I hung up with Vince and I signed my WCW contract.
Tradition says championship wrestlers give up their belt or drop it before they leave for the competition. And despite reneging on his deal, that's what Vince expects Bret to do in his last WWF match against his nemesis, Shawn Michaels.
Here's the problem. Bret didn't want to lose the championship. It's your last night in the company. We need to crown a new champion. You know what? We'll just take it from him.
As a consequence, they orchestrated this limp dick, half-assed abortion, bunch of bullshit.
But that bullshit sells out. On November 9th, 1997, Hart and Michaels battle it out in Montreal's Molson Center.
The match lasts 10 to 15 minutes.
But it's the last 30 seconds that everyone is still arguing about.
I could see Vince McMahon, and Vince snaps at him to ring the fucking bell. Oh, they're screwing me right now. And I remember reaching back and showing that I wasn't submitting, and I grabbed Sean's leg and started to reverse. But you could hear the bell, bing, ding, ding.
If I hadn't rung the bell, Vince McMahon was going to ring that bell.
I wanted to just kill Vince. I wanted to just jump through the ropes and just punch him out. And I couldn't believe he did it to me after all the years that I gave him and all the matches and all the hard work. And he would disrespect me like that. You son of a bitch. I remember I had a nice good gobber spit. And I remember I just leaned over the top rope. Cameras are off. Show's over. I got screwed. Vince said something to me along the lines of, this is the first time I ever had to lie to one of my talent, which is such a lie. And I remember when I got tying my last shoelace, I started to tie it and I go, well, this is it. I'm gonna punch out Vince McMahon. I can't believe I'm doing this. And we walked towards each other, end up tying up, just like a pro wrestling match. And I remember just sinking down and kind of just turning my whole body and thinking 14 years and coming up right between our arms. And I hit Vince McMahon with the most beautiful Mike Tyson uppercut. I popped him literally right off the ground. He went straight down, out cold. Everybody was stunned. No one could believe it.
It's like I remember when I was a kid exactly where I was standing when John F. Kennedy had been assassinated. And I remember just as precisely where I was when I found out about the Montreal Screwjob.
Vince immediately goes on the offensive, appearing on TV with the black eye he got from Bret Hart's uppercut.
Did you or did you not screw Bret Hart?
There's a time-honored tradition in the wrestling business that when someone is leaving, that they show the right amount of respect. Bret Hart didn't want to honor that tradition.
Vince was really giving Bret Hart all kinds of shit.
Vince in this interview just came across very cold, calculating, and very, very heelish.
I truly believe that Bret Hart screwed Bret Hart.
The Montreal Screwjob is a seminal moment in wrestling. The event pulls back the curtain to reveal Vince's true nature as the win-at-all-costs owner of the WWF.
And then once the word got out that he actually owns the company, he's the power behind the throne, this and that, Vince ran with it.
But soon, Vince will embrace his on-screen character's evil spirit.
I will never, ever forgive your mother for giving birth to you.
Vince McMahon declined to participate in this documentary. Barely a decade after buying the WWF from his dad, Vince McMahon's career is a whiplash of career-threatening scandals inside and outside the ring.
In the early to mid-90s, Vince was so distracted. So he's fighting on all these fronts,
these scandals and things breaking all around him.
There was a former referee that was hiring young ring boys, and he had some type of a toe fetish. I mean, really, really weird stuff was coming out to the extent of, bro, that's so unbelievable, it's wrestling, that can't be true.
And he's perhaps not able to put as much attention and care into the product, and it was showing.
With the WWF's TV ratings now in a nosedive, Vince McMahon is facing his worst fear, no longer running the country's most successful wrestling entertainment company. That title could soon belong to a media mogul with exceptionally deep pockets.
Ted Turner bought out Jim Crockett Promotions, and it became WCW.
Eric Bischoff had been given control of WCW. He decided that he wanted to go head-to-head with Vince McMahon, and he talked Ted Turner into it.
We just want to be as successful as Vince is, and then we'd like to, kick his butt.
And according to Vince, Ted Turner calls Vince and says that I'm in the wrestling business.
And he goes, well, that's great, Ted. I'm in the sports entertainment business.
And those are two completely different philosophies.
World Championship Wrestling has always been one of our most popular programs. And now WCW is about to dominate the globe in professional wrestling.
Bischoff immediately gets to work running Vince McMahon's playbook by stealing away WWF talent.
You had Hulk Hogan. You had the Macho Man Randy Savage. You had all of these big stars of the 80s. And Vince slowly begun taking them off television. And so Eric Bischoff believed that these guys still had the ability to draw.
Hogan went over, Piper went over, Rick Rude, Kurt Hennig. One by one, they started signing WWE talent.
I think Vince was having a very difficult time when the tactics that he used to win the first war were being used on him, and he was behind.
Vince McMahon calls a company-wide meeting, and he says, well, they've taken everybody, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, wait a minute, you're the victim now?
And it was funny to me because he was going like, they're stealing my talent. And I go, Vince, that's how you built your company. You stole everybody's talent.
Eric Bischoff put Monday Nitro opposite Monday Night Raw. And what happened was you had a nostalgia effect. You had these kids who were like, oh my God, Hulk Hogan is, he's on WCW. Macho Man Randy Savage. And then Eric, he brought in wrestlers from Japan, wrestlers from Mexico. It worked a very different style. They were high flyers. It was very, very fast, very colorful. And Vince's product felt slow, old.
Papa Shango striking sheer terror in the hearts of this capacity crowd.
I think it was 95, 96. I think he was losing $6 million a year. And WCW ended up winning the ratings war for a straight year and a half, every single Monday.
Ted Turner, WCW beating him for 83 weeks at his own game. That set a fire underneath Vince McMahon.
So the man who once drew inspiration from Walt Disney dramatically changes course, rebranding the WWF as more adult, meaning more violent, and a lot more sexual.
We've embarked upon a far more innovative and contemporary creative campaign that is far more invigorating and extemporaneous than ever before.
Vince stole all sorts of stuff. He stole a lot of the concepts that Eric Bischoff had come up with. He stole the hardcore and the violence.
It was almost like Vince's own inner self kind of exploding into the WWF product. Violence and class warfare and just different kinds of sexual content and edginess. It was a play to win this war.
The WWF's graphic storylines target the WCW audience, angsty teens and 20-somethings.
Vince McMahon's got the Midas touch. He's the guy who knows how to reach those teenagers.
Including with this guy, Stone Cold Steve Austin.
I do what I want, when I want, and if I don't want to answer your little questions, I ain't got to. What I do ain't none of your business. I don't give a rat's ass if you own the WWF or not.
Steve Austin, huge star. If you were a kid in high school, middle school in the 90s, you could go to school, there'd be Austin 316 shirts everywhere. Everybody knew Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Vince goes on air and justifies the WWF's edgier rebrand after getting some pushback from parents and the press.
So when we hear some people squawking and whatever, I think that's a good sign because it says that we are going up to a certain edge creatively. We don't want to go over that edge and fall off. That's not good either. But I think you have to open the creative envelope.
WWF slowly started kind of chipping away and getting people interested in watching their show again. Raw and Nitro were on at the same time, Monday night on 2 different networks. So you already had a lot of fans who would switch back and forth. But then as it started getting better, then they started going, well, hold on, put the remote down. We're not going back to Nitro. I want to see Austin is kicking Vince McMahon's ass on television. This has never happened before.
And I don't think there's any subject matter, by the way, that's off bounds, that's off limits.
That includes writing himself into the show as the amoral Mr. McMahon, the power-hungry, take-no-prisoners owner of the WWF. Some see it as typecasting.
I enjoy destroying lives.
Mr. McMahon takes on every top-billed star of WWF, from The Rock to Triple H, and an infamous head-to-butt match with Stone Cold Steve Austin.
You said you could beat Vince McMahon with one arm tied behind your back.
Stone Cold is there! Stone Cold's wearing Vince McMahon's bare ass out with another belt!
Even Vince's family isn't safe from the wrath of Mr. McMahon.
I will never, ever forgive your mother for giving birth to you. Your mother had a certain reputation. A good time girl reputation, if you get my drift.
The father-daughter feud culminated in the I Quit match, where Vince chokes out his own child with a steel pipe.
Mr. McMahon is one of the greatest heel characters of all time, yes.
Critics say the World Wrestling Federation blows away the envelope of good taste with a parade of raunchy characters like a pimp who struts into the ring with prostitutes.
Man, I want you to roll a fatty for this pimp daddy. Light that blood up and say!
The WWF fan never saw this before. The numbers got higher and higher and higher and higher. We turned it into must-see TV.
A lot of the women, that started coming up wanted to be wrestlers, and they didn't really want the women to be wrestlers. They thought, people don't want to watch women wrestle. They want to see TNA disguised as wrestling. Basically, the idea was hire people who could pose in Playboy, and many of them did pose in Playboy, and go out there and wear as little as possible and rip clothes off and all this. And that's when the TV ratings with the teenage boys through the roof.
After 83 straight weeks of losing out to WCW, there's finally cause for Vince to celebrate.
McMahon says there's only one group that he pays attention to, and that's his audience. And he will bend in any direction that they tell him to.
Forget the morality, forget the ethics. Strictly from a business standpoint, you go too far, then what's next? A chainsaw? You can't go there.
Are you approaching that?
I don't know. I think the audience is going to tell us.
Or he will tell the audience.
On behalf of the World Wrestling Federation, for those of you who were offended, those viewers, we humbly apologize for the incident that took place last Monday night on Raw.
By the late 90s, what's dubbed the Attitude Era puts Vince McMahon back on top. But to stay there, he resorts to more and more drastic theatrics, including a home invasion on a controversial 1996 episode of Monday Night Raw.
We are live. Austin is outside of Brian Pillman's home.
Steve is a dead man walking because when Austin 316 meets Pillman,
oh my God.
9mm cut.
Oh my God.
I'm gonna blast his shirt straight to hell.
The reaction was pretty negative to it. I mean, it was pretty darn negative. Vince had to actually go on television and apologize for that angle because it got so much negativity.
We humbly apologize for the incident that took place last Monday night on Raw.
I think that's the only angle Vince ever apologized for.
Including the ones involving stunts in which his wrestlers didn't always want to participate.
Vince McMahon wanted wrestlers to start being actors at this point, and he couldn't understand why they didn't want to go along with it.
Surely the era of the superhero who urge you to say your prayers and take your vitamins is definitely passé.
It was that tipping point that we reached at that time between we're not going to use great wrestlers just because they're great athletes. They have to be willing to put on goofy outfits and do skits.
But many of these new gimmicky storylines don't land with fans. So Vince is once again forced to find the next big superstar to re-energize the WWF. And like before, it's the Hart family that delivers.
Owen Hart, as a rookie, he was spectacular. His acrobatics were amazing. He could flip backwards off the ropes. He could land on his feet from every direction.
Owen has the athleticism, but not the over-the-top personality of a Hulk Hogan or Stone Cold Steve Austin, the traits that have always resonated with Vince.
In the new entertainment attitude era, they didn't know what to do with Owen.
They had him doing one horseshit persona after another. The Blue Blazer, the American Eagle. I was shaking my head.
Vince can be very spiteful for his own amusement, give them very demeaning characters or roles, and kind of have fun at their expense because he's their boss. He can be a tyrant.
Vince tries to write Owen into edgier storylines, but Owen refuses. But perhaps because of how he treated Owen's brother, Bret, in the Montreal Screwjob, Vince keeps Owen around. Then Vince decides to put Owen's athleticism to the test. On May 23, 1999, Owen travels to Kansas City's Kemper Arena for a WWF event called Over the Edge. From 8 stories up, Owen will be lowered into the ring.
Owen did not want to come down from the rafters. They talked him into it.
He's done the gimmick before. Riggers experiment with a quick-release harness, so Owen can get back into the action quicker. Some claim the WWF replaced their original riggers with a cut-rate crew who say they can make it happen. But the poorly designed quick-release mechanism they use proves deadly.
I'm looking at my monitor, and all of a sudden, I looked up. I just caught Owen coming into my line of vision. A blur. Poof.
But like all the fans are watching, and at first they're thinking, that's weird. They dropped a dummy from the rafters.
I thought I heard screaming, and then I felt something brush against the side of my head and my shoulder, and I'm thinking in my head, what the heck was that? And when I turned and looked, there was Owen. He was like laying in the ring, like face up, and I just started screaming for help.
I thought he hit the turnbuckle or the ring post because it really sounded sick.
Somebody said, Owen just fell, and I went, Owen fell, what? He goes, Owen just fell.
Well, it's one of the most shocking things I've ever seen. This is not your typical wrestling storyline. This is a real situation.
I've never seen anything like that. Not on any wrestling program, not on any television program. It's never happened before.
I was just reiterating to the fans, this is not a part of the show. We're here to entertain and have fun, but this is neither.
As emergency workers tend to Owen and his shocked colleagues look on, someone calls Vince to decide what to do next.
And they wheeled Owen past us to go to the ambulance, and
Vince's decision sends shockwaves through the WWF.
They didn't want to stop the show, so Jeff Jarrett, who was real close with Owen, did a promo, and he was in tears.
Owen Hart, I'm praying for you, buddy.
The show must go on. They got to go in there and do their match with Owen's blood in the corner.
Kevin Dunn, the executive producer, thought that I had been told that what the deal was. And I said, Kevin, nobody's told us anything. What is the update? And he said, he's dead. And you're back in 10, 9.
And I have the unfortunate responsibility to let everyone know that Owen Hart has died. Owen Hart has tragically died from that accident here tonight.
It's only after deciding to continue the show that Vince finally reaches out to Owen's wife to tell her that there was an accident. but he leaves it to the doctor to deliver the news that devastates her.
I miss my husband, and I'm sad for myself that I'm a widow at 32, and I have 2 children that are fatherless now.
A police investigation into Owen Hart's death begins immediately. If criminal negligence is found, Vince's WWF could very well get shut down.
I think a lot of fingers were being pointed. Did they cut corners? Was it a cut rate kind of thing?
Owen was such a loyal and dependable and reliable and safe performer. And, you know, it's so upsetting that he needlessly died just for a silly ring entrance.
What hurt Vince at the time and the company image-wise, and this can't really be overstated, was the decision to continue the show. And that's something that has been second-guessed ever since, even to this day.
Should the show go on? Should we cancel the show? Come on, man. Nobody was in their right mind that day to make any kind of a decision, including Vince McMahon.
Owen Hart's death makes national news. When a reporter questions Vince about his culpability, she's immediately met with Vince's first rule of crisis management. The best defense is an obnoxious offense.
Well, it would appear that there were no precautionary measures taken. Why not?
First of all, I resent your tone.
I resent sarcasm. Again,
no, I resent your tone, lady, okay?
Why
you know, this was a tragic accident.
On June 15, 1999, Martha Hart begins her pursuit for justice.
My legal counsel filed a wrongful death lawsuit against WWF, Vince McMahon, and all others I believe are responsible for my husband's death.
Vince denies acting spitefully towards Owen or any culpability for this accident, and successfully sues the manufacturer of the quick-release device. Martha Hart eventually settles with the WWF for $18 million, using the money to start the Owen Hart Foundation.
I'm a very forgiving person, and I'm not bitter or angry, but there will be a day of reckoning, and this is my final promise to Owen.
As Martha and her children try to rebuild their lives, Vince finds himself in the middle of yet another shocking incident when a plane full of his employees travel on a WWF chartered transcontinental flight from Europe.
I remember sitting in the first class section. I think Jim Ross was up there. Generally, the coaches and the managers sat up there, and in this case, the wrestlers were in the back.
Wrestlers would behave badly on the road, on planes, in hotels, and in bars. And on this privately chartered flight, they got out of control.
As alcohol and pills flow freely, a couple of wrestlers begin assaulting the flight attendants.
And I was in the galley. He had me back against the back door, and I couldn't move. I couldn't get away from him. He was spinning around his penis, and he wanted me to touch it, and he took my hand and put it on him.
After a wrestler intervenes, another moves in on the still-shaken stewardess.
He grabbed my shirt and pulled me down, and my shirt buttons got ripped. He told me he was going to lick me, and then he proceeded to try to do that. It was a moment of great violation, discomfort to have a person put their hands on you without you wanting them to do that. And then he passed out.
Once safely back on the ground, the two flight attendants sue. Vince intervenes and does one of the things he does best: throw money at the problem.
They offered us a settlement. Money is what ends up on the table, I think, and then it also buys you silence, which then can add to another layer of the guilt of a victim. Like it can be a cycle that's not good, yeah, perpetually bad.
Paying people off becomes Vince's go-to strategy to make bad press disappear, but he'll eventually learn the danger in buying people's silence. It only works until somebody talks.
If these stories from the actual people inside started coming out, I don't even know if there would be a wrestling business by the time all the investigations were complete.
For decades, Vince McMahon proves to be uniquely skilled at surviving scandals, from claims of sexual harassment to illegal steroid use, even an accidental death lawsuit, by first unequivocally denying responsibility for any of them. So it's business as usual in 2006, when he quickly dispenses with an ugly new allegation.
That was another story back in the day where he went to a tanning salon called Tanzabar.
In the police report, it says a 22-year-old tanning salon employee met Vince McMahon when he went in to buy 20 minutes of tanning. He asked her to take a photo of him so that he could send it back to his girlfriend in New York. And then when she handed his phone back to him, he sort of scrolled through a number of photos that he had taken of himself.
He ends up, I believe, showing pictures of himself, naked pictures of himself, to the tanning salon attendant.
He allegedly grabs her, touches her, tries to lift up her blouse, tries to kiss her, according to her allegations. And then she rebuffs him, ends up putting like both her hands on his chest to push him away. And then he responds by saying, you know, I was only trying to have a little fun.
And the woman ran out of the room yelling and screaming, called the police, found out it was Vince McMahon.
The police determined there's probable cause that McMahon had committed a crime. So they refer that to the local prosecutor's office, who in turn declined to prosecute because there's not enough evidence.
While Vince's lawyer fervently denies that the woman was paid to drop the charges, others aren't so sure.
Well, when you have that kind of money, I guess things go away.
Anytime there's accusations, no court case, you presume payoff. But I don't know that. These rumors have been in wrestling for ever. The tanning salon story came out, but whether it's true or not, these were not isolated incidents.
Vince was a known womanizer, but I don't want to say it was kind of expected in that industry, because everybody was.
But for many wrestling fans, Vince's alleged abhorrent personal behavior proves less concerning than his apparent willingness to exploit the tragic deaths of his wrestlers, beginning with Eddie Guerrero.
Wrestling fans, of course, all know who Eddie Guerrero is. He's considered as one of the absolute best wrestlers of all time.
When Eddie dies tragically at 38 from a heart condition, Vince McMahon immediately organizes a tribute show.
Eddie Guerrero has passed away.
But months later, Vince sees an opportunity to generate some heat off Eddie's death and authorizes wrestler Randy Orton to trash Eddie's memory.
Let me tell you something, bro. Eddie ain't in heaven. Eddie's down there in hell.
Some fans are furious at the idea that Vince would exploit Eddie's death in a naked grab for TV ratings. Nearly 2 years later, everyone will be shocked at Vince's fire, ready, aim response to another tragic event. One that will leave folks openly questioning if Vince cares at all about the health and safety of wrestlers in the WWE.
If you're a wrestling fan, how could you not be a fan of Chris Benoit's work?
In June 2007, Benoit is scheduled to perform in Texas, but no one's heard from him. So just hours before the show, police are dispatched to Benoit's house, where they discover the bodies of Chris, his wife Nancy, and young son Daniel.
At this time, no one knew what happened. Did someone break in? Did carbon monoxide happen? No one has answers.
Police notify the extended Benoit family. While inside the arena, word spreads quickly among the wrestlers about what happened to Chris and his family.
Vince McMahon, the chairman of the board, couldn't go on the air and not do anything. So we went on the air and did what we thought was right.
Tonight, this arena here in Corpus Christi, Texas, was to have been filled to capacity with enthusiastic WWE fans.
We tried to honor the guy, we tried to honor his family, tried to honor his fans, but we didn't have a full story.
So tonight will be a 3-hour tribute to one of the greatest WWE superstars of all time.
Vince is premature in the tribute because not long after calling him one of the greatest, the real story comes out.
Right now it's being investigated as a murder-suicide. However, until we get the crime lab reports, it's undetermined exactly what happened.
On Friday evening, it appears that there was some sort of altercation between Chris and Nancy, that Chris restrained Nancy with duct tape and then utilized a telephone cord to strangle her and then placed a Bible next to her body. Next morning, on Saturday, Chris, we assume, gave his son Daniel Xanax and then murdered him in his room, being suffocated by his father. A Bible was then placed next to Daniel as well. On Sunday, Chris then went down to his home gym with a half-drunken bottle of wine. He wrapped a towel around his neck, and he took the metal cord from the lat pull-down machine and put it around his neck. He adjusted the weights to 240 pounds, and then he released it.
We did not know all the information. That's our fault. We were trying to serve the audience. It was a major story. It was hitting all the news sources, and we had a TV show.
Vince attempts damage control for his decision to publicly canonize Benoit.
Last night on Monday Night Raw, the WWE presented a special tribute show, recognizing the career of Chris Benoit. However, now some 26 hours later, the facts of this horrific tragedy are now apparent. Therefore, other than my comments, there will be no mention of Mr. Benoit's name tonight.
But soon the story shifts away from Vince's ill-advised statement following the murder-suicide and to the more damning question of the role wrestling itself played in the deaths of the Benoit family.
Speculation is running wild. Did steroids play a role, or is there another explanation? We have an exclusive interview with WWE Chairman Vince McMahon.
WWE did everything they could to combat any coverage in the news media that indicated that drug abuse or steroid abuse was the cause of the homicides.
And obviously this is not an act of rage, it's an act of deliberation. When you do something like this over 3 days, it's not an act of rage, be it steroid rage or roid rage, whatever it's called, or any other rage.
In his autopsy, Chris Benoit was shown to have enormous amounts of testosterone in his body. Testosterone is still a steroid that's banned in all major sports.
Despite a wellness program Vince set up to monitor his wrestlers for drugs, critics say the system he created too often failed.
Preposterously, Chris Benoit passed wellness checks leading up to the murder, despite the irrefutable fact that he was taking enormous amounts of steroids.
But neuroscientist and former wrestler Chris Nowinski has a hunch that Chris's behavior was informed by a little understood condition that is also adversely affecting some football players: CTE.
Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, is a progressive degenerative brain disease that appears to be started by hits to the head. With Chris, he actually had what would be defined as a severe case of CTE at 40 years old.
3 years after the shocking murders, Vince is finally forced to address the appalling policy surrounding his wrestlers' health and safety. After a thorough review, the WWF permanently bans all chair shots to the head. But like the NFL, violence in pro wrestling has never been a bug, but a feature. So, it's a problem Vince McMahon has never been anxious to move center stage, especially back when his company embarked on a move that would transform the WWF while helping set the stage for Vince's ultimate demise. The seeds of Vince McMahon's downfall were planted back in the late 90s. Despite being rocked by a series of personal and professional scandals that might have taken down other businesses, Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Federation was a cash-printing financial juggernaut. So Vince decided his company needed to go to the place where that kind of success is rewarded: Wall Street.
And WWF in 1999 was having its hottest period of business ever, even hotter than the hot run with Hogan in the mid-'80s. Vince liked the idea of being a stock that you could trade in the New York Stock Exchange.
With an eye towards this initial public offering, from 1998 to 1999, Vince went to work, doubling the WWF's revenue to over $250 million.
He made huge money, and so, just like that, Vince is a billionaire.
But with great power comes great responsibility, or maybe just greater oversight.
The WWF, it had to be more above board. It couldn't be this secret company with the secret monies and the, payoff. Your finances had to be a lot more transparent.
The IPO for WWF put the final nail in the coffin of defeating WCW.
WCW was still relying on Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage and Roddy Piper, and they didn't realize that in wrestling, everybody has a shelf life. There was nothing they could do to stop Steve Austin and The Rock from getting this young audience back in.
From 1997 to 2000, WCW went from making $125 million a year to losing $65 million a year. That's a lot of mistakes.
Vince blew them away very quickly.
The major concern was just putting them out of business, was just eliminating them from competition.
And at the end of the day, Vince bought World Championship Wrestling for essentially, $2.5–4 million. It's inconceivable.
Nitro had its last episode in March 2001.
Here I am on WCW television.
When Vince bought WCW, they kicked it off by this almost surreal angle.
It was just a matter of time before I, Vince McMahon, bought my competition.
And actually, he appeared on Nitro.
That's right. I own WCW.
I don't know if anybody else could have done what Vince did without being as cutthroat as he was. He was tunnel vision on, I will build this, I will see success.
He wasn't going to allow himself to fail.
By the early 2000s, Vince essentially owns all professional wrestling, or at least the kind of professional wrestling you can watch on mainstream TV. While that will be good for his investors, it will leave many fans wondering what happened to the WWF they loved in the 90s.
There were a lot of people internally, particularly marketing people, they wanted to have a family-friendly product again that was more maybe advertising-friendly, sponsor-friendly. They wanted to be able to sell merchandise to children, which they had stopped doing.
They don't want to sponsor a show where this dude hit this other guy in the head 12 times with a chair, he's bleeding everywhere, blah, blah, blah.
We can't have the half-naked women. We can't have storylines involving porn stars and that kind of thing.
There is a sentiment from the audience, this is too tame, it's not wild enough, bring back the Attitude Era.
A lot of fans blamed it for the decline of popularity of WWE.
WWE sucks. I have watched the slow and steady regression of this company.
From 2001 to 2022, the ratings have gone down every single year.
Sometimes you sacrifice popularity for money, and WWE's done that in many decisions that it's made in recent years.
Even though the audience declined, they have become a more profitable company than they ever were before. They are, at this stage of the game, getting the majority of their revenue from TV rights fees, where you have Fox or you have Comcast, NBC Universal, that are paying large amounts of money, totaling in billions, to get this programming on the air. I don't think that these media giants would be as quick to do business if you were back in the Attitude Era, where you had an elderly female wrestler giving birth to a hand on television.
So, despite the grumblings from longtime WWE fans, Vince is making more money than ever. And that's when, according to some experts, he starts getting lazy.
He had the monopoly. He's making billions of dollars. He's got a contract with Fox. He's got a contract with USA. He's getting millions of dollars, whether the product is good or bad. And I really think from that point forward, man, I think he just coasted.
Nowadays, it's kind of this stagnant, stale, sterile style that's kind of lame and uninspiring. The fan base has dwindled.
And Bruce Hart attributes that to Vince getting everything he wanted when he took over his father's territory.
Ultimately, it's been one of the worst things that ever happened to the business. It's kind of destroyed the grassroots of the business. Back in the day, there was all these different styles. You know, Calgary had a unique style. San Francisco had a style. Charlotte, North Carolina had a certain style. Variety's the spice of life, and that was the case with wrestling.
And fan satisfaction is at an all-time low.
Dude, I can't watch this show. It's too long. It doesn't make sense.
Absolute torture for me. I would have rather be watching ballet, bocce, darts, anything but this show.
$2.3 billion television deal over 5 years. You can write the worst show ever. You're gonna be fine.
And in his mind, this is still the end-all, be-all, the greatest show out there. That's how delusional he is.
But he's about to get snapped back to reality.
The billionaire CEO and primary shareholder of World Wrestling Entertainment stepping back temporarily from his leadership roles within the company.
In July of 2022, the Houdini of professional sports finds himself trapped by past misdeeds from which he cannot escape.
The former WWE Chief Executive Vince McMahon paid hush money to 4 women to cover up allegations of sexual misconduct and infidelity.
Vince McMahon has agreed to pay 4 women over $12 million over the past 16 years to keep quiet about allegations of sexual misconduct.
That's according to the Wall Street Journal.
Vince had a number of payouts to various women over the years.
Payouts he expected to remain secret by using non-disclosure agreements or NDAs.
There were a total of at least 4 NDAs that the Wall Street Journal reported on. A former paralegal, a former contractor, a former WWE talent, a former manager.
Apparently, one agreement included a 2006 pact, and that involved a former manager who he allegedly initiated an intimate relationship with. It paid her $1 million to keep quiet about it.
Reportedly, he wired money from his personal accounts to pay for the NDAs.
Did other people know about these affairs?
I think within the world of wrestling, and certainly within the company, everybody knew, yes. But I mean, as far as wrestling fans, no, they didn't know.
And for those in the audience long entertained by the evil Mr. McMahon character, the new accusations sound like business as usual in the WWE.
The first story in the Wall Street Journal about these allegations came out. And next thing you know, Vince is strutting out on SmackDown.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. McMahon!
I'm here simply to remind you of the 4 words we just saw and what we call the WWE signature. Those 4 words are then, now, forever, and the most important word is together.
Everybody cheers, yeah! Goes about his day, like nothing had happened. That was his response to that first Wall Street Journal story.
Vince eventually claims that he never did anything wrong and points to clauses in the settlement agreement specifically disavowing any wrongdoing. But unlike with his other indiscretions and misdeeds, McMahon quickly discovers he can't just turn these charges into part of the show.
This is a publicly traded company. These are SEC violations.
And that has apparently led to the Department of Justice and the SEC making their own inquiries.
The billionaire CEO and primary shareholder of World Wrestling Entertainment stepping back temporarily from his leadership roles within the company.
And then another story broke. That one was talking about coercing a woman, paying a woman $7.5 million and coercing her to have sex through his power. And then when she stopped having sex with him, he demoted her. And I read this and it was just like, I don't know that he can survive this.
Nobody has said one time, I am innocent. I did not do that.
If you write something about Vince that is negative to him, he goes after you right away. I thought Vince and his lawyers are going to go after those writers. They did not touch him. And I go, oh my God, it's all true.
The silence is just absolutely deafening because that's not Vince, not when he's not guilty.
The accumulation of all the things that occurred over the years, whether you want to call it karma or whatever you want to call it, they did finally catch up with him.
And at least one person essential to Vince McMahon's success has jumped ship. Linda McMahon.
Well, you have to remember that Vince and Linda, they really built it together. So there was that sense of, even though all these things are happening to our marriage and these scandals, and Vince himself has admitted many times that he was certainly a lot less than faithful to Linda, they continued on, and I think part of it was because of this empire that they had built together.
They've been separated for quite some time. I was told this around 2012, but again, we get back to wrestling. Everything's a secret. Well, now it looks twice as bad for Vince because now it looks like he was cheating on his wife when the reality was they weren't together.
But now her involvement with the company is nil.
Are you concerned at all about the investigation? No. The hush money investigation?
Come on. So I told you I'm here to talk about AFPI.
And after 40 years at the helm of WWE, Vince McMahon steps down using those same 4 words he delivered defiantly to his fans just days earlier. He sent out a tweet. At 77, time for me to retire. Thank you, WWE Universe. Then, now, forever. Together.
Earlier tonight, my father, Vince McMahon, retired from WWE.
I don't think anybody would have ever said that Vince McMahon would have ever stepped down.
The idea that Vince is gone, it was bizarre because everybody figured that he was going to do this until he died.
The WWE is his life.
And of course, it's wrestling, so a lot of fans believed, he'll be back, or he's not really gone.
I'm sure wherever he's hunkered down, he is doing as much WWE work as he can get away with.
It's a complicated ending for the most divisive figure in sports entertainment.
Obviously, he was extremely flawed. But as a businessman, as a wrestling promoter, fantastic.
I think he'll be remembered as the most dominant wrestling promoter there ever was.
And to his daughter, now left to manage the WWE, he remains a man worthy of admiration.
Thank you, Vince. Thank you, Vince.
The bad of Vince McMahon is what he did to get there. Bodies that were left in the wake for one reason or another. We're slowly cleaning up this mess that Vince had left, and the show is improving dramatically. There was concern that stock price was going to plummet. Vince McMahon, the only guy that can make wrestling work in this country, is gone. And instead, he is gone, and it's actually doing better now than it was doing before he left.
To me, it's really all about money and power. When you reach a certain status and when you reach a certain level, I do believe you are bulletproof. How could you have done these things without the fear of it coming out? You honestly thought these women were gonna sign a piece of paper and you were just gonna get off scot-free.
When Vince McMahon dies, he did not want the tombstone to say Vince McMahon, world's greatest wrestling promoter. Vince wanted to be that guy who had a movie studio, who promoted boxing, who ran the rival football league to the NFL. That's the guy he wanted to be. And at the end of the day, he tried in all those places, and he failed everywhere except one.
Would I call him an evil person? I would not. I would call him a complicated person who was enabled by an industry that allows people with a dark side to entertain that dark side with impunity.
And in the end, his legacy is that he was a guy with a lot of money, and he thought he was above it all, and he wasn't.
I really believe it's the tip of the iceberg. It's the carny business. And what happens in wrestling stays in wrestling. But all it takes is one person, and then those floodgates open. So I unfortunately, man, I just think you're gonna see more.